Hello all, this is Piyush. As part of GS Foundation Planner, now we have come up with a new lecture that is based on history. So you all know that history is a very important component of your syllabus and it is important in both the areas, in pre as well as means examination. But the moment it comes to history, many of you believe that history is one of the toughest areas of your syllabus. Why? Because there are certain notions, there are certain preconceived notions, there are certain confusions regarding the subject which is there. And because of what, ultimately there are so many people that feel very scared of this subject. Specifically for those who are coming from the science background, the commerce background, they believe that it is very tough to recall all these facts, figures. Why? Because that's a basic perception for the history, that the moment it comes to history, it is all about the dates, it is all about the various names, wars and other things. And specifically when it comes to ancient and medieval, now this is the most common problem with most of the students, and they believe it is very tough and we won't be able to deal with this segment. But frankly speaking, first of all, you need to understand one thing very carefully, that it is just the part of syllabus. So nobody is expecting from you to become the master of the subject. Rather, there is one requirement that is needed in the pre and the mains examination, and somehow you have to fulfill that you can cross this barrier. You can clear the pre, you can go through the mains examination. That is the only objective. So never ever try to become the master of the subject. Rather, you have to somehow prepare the subjects in such a way that you can clear the pre and the mains examination. Now there's another problem when it comes to history. Basically, there are several areas of history that you need to cover. So you don't need to only cover the ancient, medieval or the modern Indian history, because earlier what happened when it comes to the UPSC syllabus, now the areas which were focused upon was the modern Indian history and the freedom struggle, and then certain topics of art and culture. So people felt like a bit comfort that okay, these are two areas that they are supposed to cover. But now if you'll see the syllabus, so I think everything has been included. So the ancient Indian history is there in the syllabus, the medieval Indian history is there in the syllabus, then the freedom war of freedom struggle, then you can say modern Indian history, then you can also talk about post-independence, and even world history. World history has also been included here, and along with this you need to also cover art and culture. The point is that the moment it comes to covering the syllabus, right, in this particular way, so then this question would naturally come into your mind, that how to cover all these parts. But then, as I want to convey one thing, when it comes to history, if you follow a very smart approach to cover the syllabus, in that case probably it does not remain this much problematic for you, provided, as I told you, that you have to follow a particular approach towards it. Now, in this particular session, we are going to discuss precisely about the ancient and medieval Indian history and how to cope up with this by following a very smart approach. That's the major concern or the major topic what we are going to discuss in today's session. So look, first of all, when it comes to the ancient and medieval Indian history, you have to identify, you have to understand very categorically that where exactly the requirements are there for ancient and medieval Indian history, and as per that only you need to prepare. Now, when you have been going for this kind of analysis, what exactly you should keep in mind, that there are two things. If you have been consulting them regularly, in that case, the picture in your mind will be more clear. That you can understand through the syllabus that had been provided to you by UPSC. And the second thing is about the previous year questions. Now, these are the two only hints that you are having, and that's why you should try to shape your preparation as per that. So let us try to see the syllabus first. So if we'll see the syllabus, in that case, you'll find that in the pre-syllabus what exactly they have given: history of India, Indian national movement. Now these are the only things which are given in the pre-syllabus. But the moment you go to the main syllabus, now what is given here? Indian culture, salient aspects of art form, literature and architecture from ancient to modern times. Now can you notice here that when it comes to when it comes to the pre-syllabus, in the pre-syllabus, they have written history of India and Indian national movement. Now, nowhere they have mentioned the art and culture. On the other hand, if you go to the main syllabus, in that case, you may find that here they haven't discussed about the history of ancient and medieval. Rather, they have given they have provided in the main syllabus the Indian culture And in fact, like various terminologies that have been associated with the syllabus, but here they do not mention about the ancient and medieval Indian history. Now, I think there is a logic behind that. So here they are missing art and culture, here they are missing the ancient and medieval Indian history. So as I told you that there is a logic behind it. That's the reason because of what it has been framed in this way. So it clearly means that they are going to emphasize more on Indian, ancient and medieval Indian history in the pre-part. On the other hand, when it comes to the mains part, they are not going to ask about basically the questions from the ancient and medieval Indian history, though it's not that simple also, because when it comes to specifically the term culture, this is a term which is very diverse and which is like a very Leviathan kind of term. It is a very huge term, and that's why within the umbrella of culture, anything may be asked. That problem is there. But yet, if they have been giving the syllabus in this way, it means that something has been given in form of hint to you, and that's why you should at least try to follow the syllabus, and you should try to prepare your history syllabus or your history content as per that. So by keeping this in mind, we are precisely going to discuss about two things, that is ancient, right? That is ancient and plus medieval Indian history, that how to deal with this particular area, correct? Now, when it comes to the ancient and medieval Indian history, what is the best way of covering it? First of all, the pointers that you need to keep in mind. That first thing, that if we'll see the QIQs, in that case you won't find so many questions are being asked from medieval. Rather, in the recent years, the number of questions which is increasing from which part? The ancient. You can say that the number of questions are being asked from the ancient part, and sometimes even this is also noticeable that they have increased the number of questions from ancient and medieval as compared to modern India. And why it is important to be noticed? Because earlier it was believed that as far as the pre is concerned, mostly the art and culture questions and the questions from the modern Indian history is important, or they are important, and ancient and medieval are not very important. Right now, what pattern can be noticed? Now more questions are being asked from the ancient part, and then they are coming to the next part, that is medieval. But the questions are coming from this part. But frankly speaking, this part I believe that which is more important whenever it comes to the pre-examination, right? So this is one thing that that should be there in your mind. Now the second part, are they saying that the art and culture can be ignored completely? No, they are not saying this. So basically, the moment you talk about these two distinct areas, frankly speaking, you cannot segregate the art and culture from ancient and medieval Indian history. There are so many topics, such as if I'll write about Buddhism, right? Such as I write about Jainism, such as I write about language and literature. Now, these are the topics, undoubtedly they seem to be from art and culture. But then can you tell me that they are not falling in the category of history? Of course, they are very much part of history also. This is the reason, it is very tough to segregate art and culture from, from history. I believe that only there are very few topics which could not be asked or which could not fall in the category of history, or what you do not study formally as part of history and they are part of culture, such as dance, music, festivals, fair. Only 4 or 5 topics are as such which are somehow part of the art and culture, but then they are not formally being studied as part of ancient and medieval Indian history. So what you have to keep in mind that these two cannot be segregated, and that's why when you cover the ancient and medieval Indian history, there should be a sort of comparison, or there should be a sort of approach where you try to cover both the things together, and that's how you had been preparing for all the topics, include not only ancient and medieval Indian history, but even art and culture. The majority areas of art and culture would be also covered by you. So first thing that you have to keep in mind that this is roughly a sort of approach to see the syllabus. Now coming to the next part, if you go to the next part, in that case you can find that when it comes to covering the history, right, when it comes to covering the history, now frankly speaking, many of you are not able to identify the nature of question. Now this is one thing which is very important. Look, there are so many exams in which the questions are being asked from Indian history, precisely ancient and medieval Indian history. But then if I'll ask this question, that have you ever tried to analyze that are the natures same of the questions in SSC exam or in the PCS exam and even the UPSC exam? If we'll try to somehow and try to do analysis carefully, in that case you all will be able to realize one fact. Actually, the nature of questions in UPSC is very different, and that's why while covering the syllabus, you need to keep in mind that I have to cover those contents which are, or those facts, those information which are like, as per the demand of the UPSC. So UPSC has always been asking the questions in a with a very different approach. So the moment you have understood that this question may be asked in UPSC and this cannot be asked ever in UPSC, the moment you are able to segregate the facts in this particular way, I think like half of the journey is done. Because now your content is getting limited while preparing the ancient and medieval history in Indian history, and that is like quite easy. That makes it quite easy for you. So this is another thing that you have to keep in mind, that the nature of questions like are very important, and that's how in future, if you have been paying attention to this part or while covering this particular part, always keep in mind that you have to like cover the content as per the demand of UPSC, rather than everything which is coming in the syllabus like you are not supposed to cover. When you have been writing the UGC exam, the nature of the questions will be very different. But in the UPSC exam, there is a sort of pattern that could be followed. So keep in mind the pattern, and if you have the pattern in your mind, it is like, as I told you, that it is somehow making the journey quite easy for you. Fine. Moving to the next thing, like the another thing that you should keep in your mind. When it comes to like the history, now you should always try to cover specifically the history of ancient and medieval India, like in a very chronological manner. Now, most of the students, they follow what? They follow a sort of guide, or they follow a sort of notes for it, right? So whenever you pick up the notes from the market, or let's say any particular book which has been prepared in the notes format, in that case you miss the like connecting links. When you try to cover the history while missing this connecting link, in that case the problem is there in the recalling the facts, right? Recalling becomes very much problematic, and that's why like I would suggest you that first of all you try to conceptualize the sort of development that had happened in past, specifically for ancient India. I'll suggest you this. Now when you go for like let's say covering the history of India, history of ancient India, so you need to know that okay fine, it starts from the prehistory, like good number of questions are not being asked from prehistory. Then it goes to IVC, Indus Valley Civilization. It is a very important culture and civilization or important development in ancient Indian history. When you go further, you find the Vedic age, then the like Mahajanpada, then Mauryan, then post-Mauryan. The moment you reach to the post-Mauryan, in post-Mauryan there are certain developments in the north, certain developments in Deccan and certain in south, and then there were few developments which were taking place in the northwestern part of India. And if you have covered, and then further like you find the Gupta period is coming, then Vakatakas are there, certain kingdoms are coming in Deccan and south, and then finally you go to the Harsas period, and that is considered to be the end period of ancient Indian history. Now this is the chronology. So first of all, fix the chronology in your mind. And while covering the political history, look, political history is not that important in the UPSC exam, specifically in the pre. But the political history, right? If you have a rough idea of the political history, in that case, you'll be able to somehow fit your facts properly. When you cover the ancient and medieval Indian history from the notes, in that case, what happens, you are ultimately, make it mess. You're not able to somehow fit the facts within a structured format, and that's why it is ultimately getting completely mess, and that creates problem for you. So that's, I'm not saying that you have to go to a deeper study of the political history, as frankly speaking UPSC does not ask so many questions from the political history, and that's why don't waste much of your energy into this part. But then a rough figure should be there. And while covering the chronological history, use one another thing, that is map. So while covering about any particular dynasty, if you see the map once, if you Google it, you'll find it, right? The moment you Google it, somehow that picture comes into your mind, okay, it is the Saka Chhatarpat. This is the place where exactly they had been ruling. Or when it comes to the Indo-Greeks, that was a place they had been ruling. If it's Sakas, they had been ruling in this part. If it is about Satavahanas, where exactly they had been ruling. So try to cover this chronology along with the map, Because as I told you that then it creates a sort of pictorial memory in your mind, and that pictorial memory helps you a lot in fitting the facts within it. And then you can connect the other developments along with this. Now when it comes to the other developments, right, what are the other developments I have been talking about? Let's say you have to cover a very important topic, that is language and literature, and every year you find certain questions coming from the language and literature. Now if you have covered the language and literature without having the knowledge of ancient and medieval chronological development, in that case you struggle with that. But the moment you cover it with the help of basically that chronology, in that case you even understand the gradual and the chronological development of the languages. And when you understand the chronological developments of languages, and then you fit the information pertaining to literature, what is the period in which ultimately you find that the Buddhist literature got compiled in Pali and Prakrit and the Brahmi was the script. Then you move forward, you find that okay, now they have adopted Sanskrit. Why? Because this is the same era where the Sanskrit was gradually gaining popularity, and that's the reason because of what even Buddhism is shifting towards Sanskrit, and they had adopted it as a language. So I think if this question is coming to whether this text was written in Sanskrit or Pali or Prakrit, in that case it is quite easy for you if you recall roughly the century. And again, as I told you that if you have been linking it with the other developments, historical development, in that case you can understand okay, if this particular text has been composed and compiled after the birth or the rise of Mahayana sect, in that case the chances are very high that it must be in Sanskrit rather than Pali and Prakrit. So this is the reason because of what I have been suggesting you, that the other topics that you cover from art and culture, from ancient and medieval Indian history, they should be always linked to the developments what you see in this particular site, or the chronological developments of ancient and medieval Indian history. That's why you cover the chronology, and you just fit in your mind okay, this is the historical development, and then you cover the other topics which are falling in the category of art and culture by relating it or by connecting it with the ancient and medieval Indian history. That's also one very important suggestion that I'll be giving you. Okay. The next thing which is also very important that you should keep in mind, that if you see the nature of questions coming from ancient and medieval Indian history, in that case there is one part that you can find which is very important, and this can be said as terminology. Now there are several questions from ancient and medieval, they are simply based on the terminologies. Of course, there were different kind of terminologies being followed, in ancient and medieval time. So what do? Like whenever you read any text, let's say you have covered the NCERT only, or you have been covering this particular history from the NCERT. In that case, you can find that there are compilation of the terminologies towards the end of the book. And if you do not find, you do not find them sufficient, in that case, you can take any book and without reading that particular book, only go towards the last of the book, and you can find that there is a compilation of these things, and you cover it from there. So it's not necessary that you do it you do it or let's say by reading the whole content. Rather, you can do it without reading the content. Only in the mind there should be some picture of ancient and medieval India. So terminologies are very important, and that's why you should always try to focus upon the terminologies, because as I have already told you, it is important. In the same way, I can tell you about another thing which is very important, that is about the various institution. Now, what is institution? Institution does not mean any organization is called as institution. Now, institution may be political, institution may be economic, institution may be social, cultural, religious, it may be anything. Such as, let me give one example. When you talk about Visti, what is it? It was basically an economic and a social institution. When you talk about let's say guilds, what is it? It is an economic institution. When you talk about ICTA, what is it? It is basically a political institution or administrative institution. Now, these institutions are very important, and very frequently you may find the questions from these institutions also. So, in medieval India, specifically, I'll say that instead of paying proper attention to the whole development, political development, if you have been paying proper attention to these couple of things, in that case, probably your journey becomes easy. So, if you keep in mind only those things, frankly speaking, your job is done. And then when it comes to covering the content, right, so you can take any minor source to cover it, but then it should be a proper book. let's say ancient Indian history, like from the NCRT. Medieval you can ignore, and medieval just you can read it from somewhere, you can go through certain lectures, and by doing that you just have to fit in your mind, okay, these are the development, and then whatsoever topics which are very much important in UPSC, now that should be supplemented from some other sources, and if you have done that, I think your job is done. So basically, what I'm trying to suggest, that when it comes to ancient and medieval Indian history specifically, now just follow a right approach towards it, and don't get into this or don't go for this particular rat race, that okay, I have to cover all the content which is being asked in UPSC. Because if you have been chasing the syllabus in this way, frankly speaking, you must be negotiating with your result basically, right? So it's very tough for you to cover extensive history, and that's how you cover smartly, and that is the best solution for this. So I believe that you'll follow these suggestions, and that could definitely reflect as a positive result. Thank you very much.